also our OnlyFan. This is not an OnlyFans though. Wes, why don't we wrap up this conversation?
Yes, Grinch.
On canceled Lego sets before we get canceled ourselves.
There we go. So ultimately, what I wanted to talk about is, we know, again, that there's a significant amount of sets that were canceled kind of late in development. But as we mentioned with like the example of the Lego holiday set, we know that there's sets that were canceled even before that, right?
Hello, bricks, chicks, and minifigures. You are listening to AFOLs Welcome, where we talk about all things Lego from the perspective of two adult collectors. We're your co-host. I'm Grinch.
And I'm West.
And today we are diving into the world of canceled Lego sets. And West, it is going to be a good day because we got the intro right on the very first take. So
let's keep rolling. Yeah, let's use this momentum.
Yeah, I like it. So listeners of the podcast, sometimes that doesn't always happen. But before we get in, I think we just have a quick update for the What Are We Building this week. We are recording this episode early before Brick World. You are listening to this officially after Brick World. So if I saw anybody, it was great to see you in advance / in the present. Time is a weird thing. But also,
Grinch,
West, I think
what did you
have
think of Brick World? How did it go?
Oh, man, it was so good. I mean, just so many cool builds. I just love that my mock won an award, too. That's so crazy. I'm just kidding. No idea.
Beller's best Valorant mock by a male contributor between the age of 30 and 35.
Named Grant.
Yes.
They get really specific with their award categories. And no, I'm sure there's many awards. I will say I am currently excited to go see the GBC because I've watched every hour of Beyond the Bricks GBC review every time it's at Brick World Chicago. And I mean, it is literally like 2 hours sometimes. So that's going to be really, really cool. I'm really excited for that. But West, I think you have some moving plans you wanted to update everybody on.
Well, yes. So my time here in Southern Virginia is coming to a close, and we will be moving very shortly to somewhere close by. But then
his new address is
1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. No. We are moving, and so to kind of accommodate that, and then also this is pretty much the same time last year when a few weeks early, but we'll be also taking a bit of a summer break. Grinch, I think you've got one solo episode coming up, correct?
I have 2 solo episodes planned for the listeners.
2 solo episodes. That's exciting. So 2 episodes with Grinch, and then we'll take some time off. I think we'll kind of update that here in the future to give everyone.
So we'll be doing no episode next week, the 23rd, solo episode, no episode, solo episode, no episode, and then back full steam on the 28th. So West will be on a 5-week hiatus. I will be here keeping the troops entertained for 2 of those weeks.
So that's exciting. And it's just it's how things go. So but we're excited for our summer break and excited to come back at the end of July for a part 2 to our 2025 podcast season. So
let's get into the news. Exciting Lego news. West, why don't you take us away?
Well, Grinch, as you alluded to, we're recording this episode earlier in the week before Brick World Chicago, and so there hasn't been a lot of Lego news so far. In fact, for the listeners, we're recording this on a Tuesday. Our episode just came out yesterday on Lord of the Rings, officially. So between Monday and today, there really hasn't been a ton of Lego news that's really kind of broken the bank. So I did want to highlight 2 things that were news worthy, which is information on the 2 new Lego video games that were announced, Lego Party and Lego Voyagers. And Lego Party is a game that will feature challenge zones and 60 minifigures from various Lego sets, including Pirates, Space, and Ninjago. And with the objective of getting the most gold brick, if you've played something like Mario Party, this seems like or feels like it's going to be some sort of equivalent to that, which is actually pretty exciting. I mean, those are fun games where you're basically just playing a large game of mini games, but it is, fairly.
Not if you play the adult version.
Oh, strip
That
Mario
involves
Party.
No, I mean maybe that involves adult beverages.
Oh, okay. It's like what adult version of Mario
I'm glad that's the way
Party is.
that you took it, though. Welcome to Adult Fans of Lego, where we get extra weird.
The second game is Lego Voyagers, which is
I don't want to know how you're going to play this next one.
a creative co-op adventure game released by Annapurna Studios. So very exciting for
I think
both of these games.
in the news a few weeks ago, not a few months, like probably 6 months ago at this point, we had that announcement that Lego was going to do some more in-house
video games
gaming.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this is an outcome of that, right? It has to be.
It does. And I think these are very much up the alley of Lego in terms of kind of whimsy with that Lego Party kind of style. And then this Lego Voyagers creative co-op game seems kind of like that brick building game that came out almost a few years ago, but it's something you can do with 2 people. That's sort of the vibe I'm getting from Lego Voyagers, but we're kind of, waiting to hear more details about what this will look like. Some of the concept art looks pretty interesting. So,
yeah, Voyagers seems interesting. I'm actually excited. I mean, I the world of like couch co-op games has kind of died, and the last really good one I think I played was Overcooked. And I know like my wife and I will play these games because she doesn't like the super competitive games, but she loves these sort of games. So like I'm really looking forward to these, especially Lego Party. I think Mario Party's been kind of stale for a little while. I think the last good one I played was on the Switch, but it certainly isn't one that you feel like you have to get every single copy of. So
when you play
just
one of
having a
them,
little bit of
the formula.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
or they just kind of add a gimmick, and it's like,
Yeah.
it either works for you, it doesn't. So I think I'm excited for just kind of some new blood in this area here. So love couch co-op games, and I think these could be fun.
Yeah. I'm curious to see, the results. And this is something I need to do research on of the Horizon Zero Dawn game and how well that was received within the Lego community, because that was kind of the last big Lego video game that was released. So this is an interesting franchise, right? Because Lego is taking its experience of building and turning it into something else, and they've done a really good job of translating that into areas where they have partnered with existing IP, but areas where they do it, with sort of Lego as a whole are challenging. So I would assume that both Lego Party and Lego Voyagers will probably introduce some sort of build element into the game, but I'm curious how the execution of that goes and whether it feels natural and, fun, or if it just feels like you're, having to do more work than you really want to. Do you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, sure. The old TT games, that style, well, I think was a classic and nostalgic for a lot of people. It did become a little bit dry, and it did start to feel like anytime they came out with a new version of it,
Mm-hmm.
it's just here's the Pirates of the Caribbean skin of this, and here's one little mini game that's different in this one, and here's the superhero ones, etc. So I'm glad that they are trying new things,
Yeah.
right, and not just trying to repeat that, because those were kind of like little building building games too. So it'll be interesting for sure to see how this is received.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, with that, why don't we go ahead and move over to this week's topic? Today's topic. All right. So this week we are discussing some canceled Lego sets. And over the decades, Wes, there's actually been quite a few sets that have been canceled, more than, there's a list and more than I remembered, and definitely some I forgot. But I did want to just quickly say up front before we really get into this is, I think a lot of times anytime a set's canceled, people are always like, well, is Lego stupid? Why would they even get this far? And I think it's really, really easy to kick a ball so far down, down the lane that eventually you get to the point where you're like, wait, why are we doing this? Should we do this? Right? Sometimes you can get so caught up in an idea that you go so far with it to the point where you've got stock images of it. I don't want to say it happens all the time, but it probably in the corporate world happens more than you think, especially with a IP like Lego where they've got, tons of sets. I mean, 900 sets coming out every single year. The number of canceled sets, it's not 1%. It's probably 0.0001% of sets have ever been canceled that we know about, right? So, West, how about you kind of set up some of the problem here, and we'll dive right in.
Yeah, well, you in just your opening there inspired me to kind of comment on the fact that what we're seeing or not seeing, right, is Lego responding to something called sunk cost fallacy, which is this idea that I've already invested so much into this theme, into this idea, I should just take this to the fruition, right? And when sets are canceled, that's Lego's attempt of basically fighting against sunk cost fallacy. We hope, right, or assume to some extent. It's them recognizing we actually don't need to do this. It's more worth our time to pivot and focus our energies somewhere else. In some cases, right? And we're going to talk about some other cases tonight where that's not always the case. And sometimes Lego cancels a set for other reasons. When we talk about cancellations, I wanted to kind of set a distinction that we see both sets being canceled and themes being canceled. And when we talk about sets and themes being canceled, in some cases with sets, it's sets that we were never going to get, right? So the set was canceled before it was released. In very rare circumstances, we've seen sets pretty much canceled up into the point of mass release. We've never seen something pulled from the shelves per se. Things are usually just
there have been recalls though,
or retired early, right? I mean, or prematurely. Although it's hard to say because we don't know Lego's plan, right?
So the Ant-Man and the Wall-E set are the two recalls that come to mind.
Yeah, so that would be
because the Wall-E set was breaking. And the Ant-Man set, I think, had a choking hazard. I don't know why I'm looking over this way. It had a choking hazard.
Yeah, so certainly we've seen some instances like that, but we've never seen something like completely pulled off the shelves. And maybe there's some example from a few years ago that just we are unaware of, but usually we're seeing things canceled kind of up until that point of mass distribution. But we've also seen themes being canceled. And when I say a theme being canceled, I'm not talking about like Rock Raiders ending after a 1-year run. I'm talking about a theme just never even starting. And so that's an important distinction to make, because I think if we were to, include kind of this larger swath of things, that we could kind of, be talking about just Lego as a whole, right? Lego is always transitioning its themes, it's recycling things, it's trying new things. Now that we're seeing more IP-based Lego themes, right? We're not seeing some of those organic themes being cycled through that like they used to in the 90s and 2000s, especially, where, in our last a few weeks ago, right, we revisited our discussion on Throwbots. And we talked about how Throwbots and Robo Riders and Bionicles were like a quick succession of themes where each Throwbots and Robo Riders had a 1-year run and then they were just completely done, right? And we mentioned it, how that was on our end felt deliberate in that the lead time for production is such that it felt more intentional than it was reactionary, right? So um, I think all of those are important things to keep in mind when we talk about these themes and these sets. But Grinch, as you alluded to, there are a lot of Lego sets that have been canceled. And for the listeners, we'll post the Brickopedia link of unreleased items on our link tree so that you can follow along to the podcast episode and look through them yourselves. But the list is extensive and goes back to some of the lower set numbers and earlier sets all the way to some more recent things. So Grinch, kind of looking through this
Well,
list.
before
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
we get into there, I did want to mention every once in a while you will see it where sets are starting to get into the market. And with example of the Osprey, with example of the Overwatch set that I own, the Overwatch 2 set, they will actually get out into the wild. So, I mean, up until pretty much mass distribution, and you know, they will make this decision. There's even been, you know, we'll talk about this set in a little bit, like the Indiana Jones set, where there's a mini or a nano fig that came in that set that has been as a prototype released out into the wild, and that thing last I saw went for sale for $800 on eBay for a nano fig, which is insane. And that was like 2 years ago, like right after it was canceled, and those Indiana Jones sets were on shelf. So it will, you know, get to the point of right before, you know, hey, this thing's going live tomorrow. They will pull sets.
Yeah, and I think, you know, we'll talk about kind of the takeaway from all this. So I don't want to like preempt that conversation or spoil it, but I think ultimately, I think that's a good thing. And I'll save that there for my takeaway at the end, my hot take, if you will, on canceled Lego sets. But I do think that's a good thing. So yeah, Grinch.
So you asked me about the list.
Yeah.
Listeners, as Wes mentioned, there is a list. It's pretty extensive. I mean, there's like, I didn't count them, but there's like there's maybe 100 sets on this list.
And we are not going to go through line by line.
So number 1, basic 4275 universal building set. Number 2 is Bionicle. I was surprised by the number of Bionicle sets that were canceled. There's like 7 of them here. But the one I wanted to talk about first was not Bionicle. It's Jeffrey, the Brickhead.
Yeah.
And this is one I think was unfortunate because it was canceled. It was set to be released in 2018, which, West, as you know, Toys R Us went out of business in 2018. So this was obviously
so it's not King Joffrey from Game of Thrones. It's Joffrey the Giraffe.
Correct. The Joffrey the Giraffe
from Toys R Us.
It's kind of a shame because for Brickhead collectors, I feel like this would have really added quite a bit of like Brickhead diversity, if you would, because I don't think we've got a giraffe Brickhead. I mean, I know we don't, but we also don't have one that's, you know, this height for a Brickhead as well. But obviously meant to be a Toys R Us exclusive, right? I don't think Target would be selling a Toys R Us mascot Lego set. So when Toys R Us went out of business, they ultimately canceled this one. It's allegedly. We don't always get all the information for it, and yeah, it's kind of a shame.
Yeah, because this one they have an image of it, and it is really fun. This is one where I feel like if you were really hard pressed, you could just recreate it on your own pretty easily, especially with the simplicity of the Brickhead building style. But for listeners, I'm going to do my best to describe it because it does have the standard Brickhead bottom up to about the neck level, and then they go from a 4x4 wide building base into what looks like a 3 wide kind of centered build up, and that's his neck, and then that's the standard Brickhead head on top of that neck. It's very whimsical in a way that Brickheads already are, and so it just sort of doubles down on the whimsy. And to your point, Grinch, I think for any Brickhead collector, this would have been, you know, a really fun one to kind of differentiate the collection a little bit. I'm surprised Lego hasn't done more. I know they did the pet series recently, but more like zoo animals or just, large animals like this in general. You know what I
Hmm.
mean?
Well, and I think this one is gotta this one's gotta hurt for brickhead collectors because for the true collectors out there, the true Jedis, Brickhead has a numbering system, and so every set has the number on it that corresponds to what brickhead it is. So that means there is no 57th brickhead because this was number 57 and it was pulled. So there's a gap between 56 and 58. So to your point, I feel like this would be one that you would certainly want to recreate.
Yeah. And one where you almost could, and then just basically, call it like, you could recreate it and be like, it's the 57th one. That was never, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like that's easy.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and it's just a star because they usually use print. So look, there's like a little star print
mhm.
for like the giraffe spots. So like you could pretty easily recreate that.
Yeah,
Like that's
absolutely.
not impossible graphic design by any means.
Yeah, or just not even have it. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like you'd be just fine to kind of leave that off. But
Sure. Yeah.
so like you mentioned, there's just a ton of them. We're going to talk about two or three of them of the most recent cancellations, but just going through what's interesting is seeing different versions of the sets that are ultimately either re-released or, for example, there's a Rock Raider set, the Loader Dozer, which says it was basic. It was just the same version. It says identical to 4950. So this was set number 4959, and we talked because there was a few different variations in Rock Raiders and set numbers. Right, they had kind of identical sets. So um, there's some interesting cases where one of those sets was canceled and the other one wasn't. What we see in here, though, is a lot of sets with set numbers, but sometimes there are sets that we don't see. So one that stands out to me is actually a minifigure, which is Moe Sislak from The Simpsons, the bartender Moe. And I think he was in The Simpsons, or supposed to be in The Simpsons collectible minifigure series, and it looks like he was ultimately canceled. And that's an interesting choice. I don't know if that was like his just association with beer was too much for the CMF series or what, but interesting that bartender Mo was ultimately canceled.
Yeah. It's interesting. Probably because he's a bartender. Right? I mean, especially with CMF, like you give him all accessories. Like what accessory would you have given Mo? And I don't think you could have been like, oh no, it's brick beer. It's like root beer, but brick. Like I it's pretty cut and dry.
Yeah.
And I think he's also just kind of the characterization of Mo in the show is kind of it's not a good one, right? He's kind of like this just depressed dude, and like I'm not saying that's bad, but it certainly is not Lego's target audience. So there's probably a lot of questions on like, why are we doing this?
Did Lego have a Duff beer piece? Because it's odd. Um, it seems odd that like we wouldn't, they would draw the line there, but yeah, I mean it's understandable.
I don't think so.
Right.
I don't think so.
So
I know they did like the Simpsons Slurpee one.
okay, yeah. So I mean, I suppose that stays on brand for Lego. I feel like these days they probably wouldn't necessarily shy away from that, but
well, they just came out the Krusty Burger.
yeah. Although also, not a explicitly, a place where you're buying alcohol. So
Well, and too, as we've talked about, like the 18 plus is just a way to slap a $200 price tag on a set, and like it's not really like this is purely an adult thing. We still haven't seen like a rated R theme yet necessarily. So
that's fair. Although I would also argue that I think it's more rated PG-13 than anything. I was literally just
Yeah, but we have wine glasses too,
well,
right?
right, and that's what I mean is like I was taking apart the Imperial Fortress, and there's those wine barrels under the
Yeah.
fort, right, and it's leaking wine, and so it's very clear like what it is. It's they don't leave much up to the imagination there. So I that's where I'm saying like I feel like today we probably could have gotten something like this, whereas
And
maybe
and Playmobil's done mead, glasses too, right?
mhm,
Like it's certainly not like unprecedented.
yeah.
The next set I wanted to talk about was the Crook's Hideout, though,
Okay.
because this one I don't know why it always kind of makes me chuckle. This got to the point it didn't quite get on Lego shelves, but it was released in the catalog sort of
hmm
thing. And yeah, this one was fairly recent. What 2021? What do you think about this one?
Yeah, so this one is an interesting case, and it's one of the more modern cases of cancellation that we've seen. In fact, by my understanding, this is the third most recent cancellation, going kind of backwards, and it's was canceled in a period of kind of civil unrest here in the United States, and I think there was some concerns over its association with the theme of Lego City Police and the Lego City Robbers theme. I do have the blurb from Lego Grinch if you'll allow me to read that. Their
I will
justification.
allow it.
They write, with Lego City, we always aim to represent the reality of the world in a way that is fun, positive, and appropriate for kids. With this in mind, we have decided not to launch this product as we no longer feel it is keeping with those values of the Lego City brand. And I think it's interesting because ever since we were kids in the early 90s, right, we have seen the Lego City Police and Lego City theme expand into a police and cops and robbers kind of a thing, right? In the United States, cops and robbers is kind of a fun variation of tag that you play with. We played with our friends in the neighborhood, right? So like these type of things are not unheard of, or I would say culturally out of touch, but at the same time too, um, we have seen Lego City and the police line within Lego City kind of bend a little more towards whimsy, kind of post this 2021 era. Specifically, I'm thinking of like that wave of the Lego police where the robbers were all like shooting, wearing kind of funky costumes, and there was like the ice cream robbers and there was like the chicken robbers, and they all had kind of weird splat things that they were shooting right out of their when they were robbing things, for example, which I think came out in either 2022 or 2023. I think this set depicted maybe a too realistic of a scene, not necessarily with the way it depicted the police, but with the specific thing occurring where the robbers were or criminals were building bombs, right? And that was sort of well displayed on the building. There was a stick of dynamite that kind of appeared above the building itself, and then the rest of it was just kind of a hideout. And so I think there was that association with sort of the creation of weaponry that Lego maybe wanted to stay away from. Either way, Lego ultimately made the decision that this just didn't fit their corporate values and decided to pull this one before it was officially released. But yeah, like you mentioned, we got a snippet of this, an image of it in like an official Lego publication. So this one was fairly late to the game before they ultimately pulled it.
Yeah, a bomb factory. Probably not a kid's toy, huh?
And I
I think this one's interesting because I see the idea here. Like I think this is an example like where we set with kind of like the preface of like they obviously were like, hey, let's make a Crook's hideout. Cool. Oh, well, what are they gonna do? Like we have to have a play action. Oh, well, they're gonna explode this thing over here. Okay, cool. We'll just add that to the building. And then all of a sudden it became a building with a bomb on the top of it. And a bomb theme, and it was like, mm-hmm.
And they've associated Lego Dynamite with crooks in the past, right? So it's not even, I think, an association of like bomb with criminals. I think to your point, it's more of an association of like the production of weaponry that was more of their concern. And they've never really
Mm-hmm.
done anything quite like that or implied anything quite like that. And in 2021 too, especially after decades of improvised explosives being, used all over the world for, acts of terrorism and stuff like that, I think certainly it makes sense that Lego kind of, I'm sure somebody like took a weekend and they came back and they're like, what did we create?
So I showed a picture of this to my wife, and she was like, "You guys made a bomb factory," and yeah,
Yeah. So
got us on that one.
I'm not, I don't know about you, Grinch, but like, I don't know if this one is as controversial as maybe I think some of the internet made it feel at the time. And I think, hey, Legos is sticking to their guns, pun intended. So
No, I think I think at the time I remember people like pretty upset about this being canceled. Um, and I know you'll get to that probably towards the end of the episode. We'll probably talk more about that, but like this was always one where I was kind of like, yeah, no, I get it, especially when it's an original thing, right?
yeah.
It's that you see them bend the rules a little bit when it comes to like Star Wars, for example,
Mm-hmm.
right? But this was an original creation, so there was nothing that Lego could have really leaned back on to be like, no, 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 no. Like we were just making Mo from The Simpsons.
Right.
He's just a character.
Well, and that's where like something like Mo for me, I kind of wonder about that, right? Because like you mentioned with Star Wars, like literally the title is Star Wars. Conflict is in the title. We've gotten
Yeah.
depictions of things blowing up. We have one of my favorite sets is that Scarif landing pad set from Rogue One, where there's this play feature where you're blowing up the landing pad, and underneath it there are thermal detonator pieces. It's explosives underneath the landing pad, and you're blowing it up. Like it's a
Mm-hmm.
really easy, connection there. But to your point, right? Like that's a theme that is based off of a movie or inspired by a movie, whereas this one has no inspiration. It's original to Lego. And the Lego City theme in large is inspired from real life, right? So we don't really get a way for Lego to be like, well, we're just duplicating something that's already out there. That's,
Right.
something we've already done. And that's where I think Mo is kind of an interesting sort of hair to split, because you could really lean back and be like, look, Mo is a bartender in the story. We feel like he is an important character in the Simpsons universe, and we wanted to portray him. This isn't condoning the, just like Star Wars and creating Star Wars sets isn't condoning violence. I don't think creating Mo, the character, is condoning the consumption of alcohol or overconsumption of alcohol, right? So that would be kind
Yeah,
of
I
my
mean,
thought on that.
we have an Anakin Skywalker. Like the dude's like let's not pretend that dude didn't slaughter a room full of younglings. Now, we're probably not going to
I mean,
get
he
Order
destroyed a whole
66
planet
Anakin
later.
in the in the Jedi what is that? The Jedi Master Throne Room area.
Yes. Yeah.
I forget what it's called. But we're probably not going to get that set, but like we still have Anakin.
You mean we're not going to get an Order 66 set?
Yeah, we don't need to get like a Mo, over serving Homer at the bar set.
Right. But him in like a CMF series feels like that would be okay.
Probably fine. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, I'm curious if the listeners kind of where they kind of take that line, that distinction, and if maybe the Crook hideout was justified, or Star Wars being justified, but someone like Mo not being justified. So yeah, I think that's an interesting distinction to make. So Grinch, I wanted to actually introduce a few sets that I found were really interesting.
You go right ahead.
So these are sets numbered 75538 and 75539. And the first one is a super battle droid, and the second one is a 501st Legion clone trooper and ATRT walker. Do you know what line those sets fell under within the Star Wars theme?
These were buildable figures, right?
They were. And I think this is fascinating because the buildable figures came out around that 2016, 2017 timeframe, right as The Force Awakens was released and Rogue One was released. I think we even got, did we get, I think the Rogue One series were kind of the last ones for those buildable
Dude,
figures.
people still find those on shelf for like retail today. They were so bad.
But I remember people being so upset at them. And I mean, to the point where one person even allegedly took a box and just like a fully sealed set and just burnt it for clicks and likes and comments. I thought that was a little excessive on my end, but I could understand why some of them didn't look good or didn't, connect with the audience. I know that when they did the human figures with just sort of regular faces, they definitely looked strange. I felt like some of the troopers though were kind of cool looking. I didn't mind like the Death Trooper ones or like the Boba Fett one. I thought that looked great.
Yeah, the Darth Vader one looked good.
And so I think it's interesting to see that what we could have gotten had this line continued, had people sort of been patient with it or, willing to give it a chance, is a 501st Clone Trooper on a ATRT walker. And it's, this series sort of straddled the line between Technic and system. It kind of heavily featured Technic pieces, but I don't know if you could completely call it a Technic set. But you would effectively have gotten this Technic ATRT walker and this 501st Clone Trooper. I feel like that would have been right up everybody's alley. And then to get something like a super battle droid at kind of a almost MIDI scale of between like a UCS sized Technic battle droid. I'm thinking of like the battle droid from 2000 or 2001, the Technic battle droid that came out. So this was kind of a medium sized battle droid. And then there was at least what we know of as 3 more buildable figures, sets 75122 through 75124, that were all in the hopper to be produced had, again, this series continued. And it's just interesting to think about like what we could have gotten, I think, had people given this series more of a chance. But unfortunately,
I think
died an early death. So
I think it's important to remember these were canceled because the previous versions did not sell.
Yes.
Right? Because they were doing this for a few years at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So this was not canceled because it was marked inappropriate or anything like that. As far as we know, these were just canceled because, they just didn't sell well.
And we're speculating that, right? Because we don't really know. Like, I think that's a pretty solid conclusion based on again, the public commentary surrounding these sets. But who knows why Lego ultimately made that choice. I kind of feel like they would have stuck with them, because I think this would have been, I think they could have pivoted this series into like a Trooper series, and I think people would have eaten that up. You know what I mean? But that's my take on that. So,
well, it's interesting too because they've somewhat reintroduced this with Marvel.
Yeah.
Right. Where they've got they're buildable, right? They're system based. They're not the Technic based like these were. But we haven't really seen that with Star Wars yet, right? I mean, and they're going on 4 years now with these buildable figures for Marvel. So it's interesting. And they've been doing those at this point longer than they were doing these. So I guess it's system all the way.
Yeah. And we're actually going to talk about an interesting case where I think Lego, in hindsight, Lego probably is wishing they would have committed to something and ultimately canceled it early because of a poor reception. So I don't want to spoil that discussion quite yet, but that'll be in a...
Is it the Duplo farm set?
It's not, but we'll get to that one. So, but Grinch, how about you? Any other sets that kind of stand out to you that
Yeah, I had kind of a funny experience 6 years ago, I was going through some of the old Spider-Man stuff.
Yeah.
And I didn't have any of those sets, but I remember them coming out because it was that and Batman were like some of the first, after Harry Potter and Star Wars, of course. Those were kind of the next two licensing that they visited,
Mm-hmm.
but they did it under studios. And of course, the first kind of wave of Spider-Man sets were some studio sets, and we got this wrestling scene, and it was a Spider-Man set under the studio sub theme, and I swore this set came out. I swore
maybe it
as a
was
child
maybe it was
this set came out.
one of those like weird like areas where it was in like a eyewitness book or something. You know what I mean? Or like
Yeah, I mean, it was
maybe
in
you saw
something.
it
Like, I have
somewhere.
seen this image,
Yeah.
and it's funny because
And can you describe
I mean,
it for
even
the
the
listeners?
Wikipedia article, yeah, I mean, it's very, it's one of the old studio sets, so there's not a lot of pieces here, but it's got, part of the build is just like a little director on a camera, um, you know, a mounted camera that can kind of pivot and capture the scene. The whole idea was that you're supposed to create the scenes from these favorite movies. They did it with like Jurassic World. They did it with some other stuff. Like they had like a mummy one. They had kind of like a monsters version, but then they did it with the Spider-Man set, and it was the scene of Spider-Man fighting the wrestling champ when he's kind of first figuring out his powers in the first
Bonesaw
Sam.
McGraw.
Yeah, for the first Sam Raimi movie, and
It was
it's
actually
just
Macho
got
Man
kind
Randy
of
Savage
this.
in that part who played that part.
He did. It's just got the suggestion of the cage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then a backdrop behind it of people celebrating, and then a couple of lights, and like I said, the director's chair. 128 pieces, very small set. But I guess, according to this article, some people actually found these in the wild, and so some of them do exist out there. So yeah, but this was one where I was like, wait, that was never released. Like, no, that was released. Like I saw that in a catalog or something. Like it had to have been released.
And maybe that was it. Yeah.
Yeah, and the Spider-Man that's in it is the one with the balaclava,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a released minifigure. So these aren't exclusive. I think maybe the bone saw would have been, like with the torso would have been, but everything else wasn't. So you could probably recreate this one pretty easily, except for that backdrop piece. But yeah, I just kind of had a little trip through time as I was looking at some of these old Spider-Man sets a few years ago, and I was like, huh, I could have swore.
So yeah, this is a really interesting case of something. I believe they call that the Mandela effect, where it's like you feel like it was one thing, but in reality, it was never that thing at all.
Mm-hmm.
Right? So definitely an interesting case of seeing that and being like, yeah, because I felt the same way. I saw that image, and I could have sworn I saw that somewhere in the past.
That happened to you too?
It did. Maybe not as intensely as it
Okay.
did to you, but I definitely also was like, I didn't know this one was a canceled one. I just thought that was a thing. So
Yeah,
because it looks,
I thought this was a set.
it looks very polished. So before we go into two kind of modern examples, I did want to talk about some other things that were not necessarily on this list that we know were canceled. So we know we had a canceled Lego holiday set as part of the modern holiday series,
Mm-hmm.
where we got the re-release of the toy shop, right? And this is a good way, kind of at the start of the episode, we mentioned that these sets are somewhere in kind of mid to post-production, we assume, because they've been assigned a set number. In some cases, they were even given to people for reviewing, right? So that's kind of the right-hand side of this spectrum of mid-release to, or not mid-release, but mid-development to kind of post-development or final development and post and release, right? And so that we know at some point there were sets. I'm sure there's a ton of sets that didn't even reach that mid-development point that just never came into fruition. And we know the development period on these sets is a long time, right? I'm sure it takes years for a set from kind of initial conception of the idea to final release of the set before then it's on the shelf for 2 to 3 years with its shelf life, right? So we know that there was a holiday set that Lego was intending to offer, but we know at some point they said we can't do this for whatever reason. I don't know if anything has ever been publicly stated. And instead they revamped the original Toy Shop set and re-released that. Right. So that was kind of an interesting case where through the absence of that set, we know there was something, but at the same time too, we don't have any sort of idea publicly of what it was. We've seen some Star Wars sets that have been at least pitched, but never fully developed into kind of that post-development stage or final development stage. A good example of this is the Battle of Geonosis was a set that was initially developed. We've seen mock-ups of the creatures from that arena, the arena scene from Geonosis. And we know that there was a Yavin Temple set in the works at one point before the modern Yavin Temple was released. This was many years ago. We've seen mock-ups of that as well, but never kind of into that kind of mid to final phase of production. There are a few themes that have never quite reached that final phase of production, and there's only 3 of them in this Brickopedia article, so I'll quickly go over them. There was a theme called Cybots. If you don't like the toys from is it Zach from Toy Story, the kind of weird connections of like heads on erector sets and stuff like that, like the Cybots theme might give you the ick. Just a little bit of a warning. It's an odd theme. It looks kind of like the Jack Storm theme, but just kind of...
It's Sid, not Zach.
Sid, thank you, Grinch. Taken to its whole new...
We just minus 17 million listeners just now.
Oh, man. West Jr. hasn't quite gotten into the Toy Story theme yet, so movies, so we're good there for a little bit. But that one was a weird one. There was a Europa theme, which was kind of a Europe in the 18th century theme, featured kind of a less castle and more and not as medieval, more kind of later, more modern than castle, if you will. And then finally, the theme that got canceled that I actually think is one of the most compelling and interesting is Seatron. So Grinch, have you heard of Seatron?
Yes, because I believe there is a prototype of the like green Seatron alien thing that was never released. There is a prototype of the minifigure out there somewhere.
Yeah. Yes,
I've seen pictures. There
are pictures. And this is a theme that I think is fascinating because for the listeners who don't know, this was a continuation of the space theme, but it was done on a planet where everything was effectively underwater. So they kind of did a little bit of a cop-out to the space theme in that it's space, but it's all set underwater. And it even included an Amtrak, or not an Amtrak, but a monorail system in the theme itself. And so what this would have done for kind of that space theme is introduced a lot of new colors and a lot of new kind of ideas, specifically looking at kind of the aliens, and it really feels like Aquanauts.
I think we eventually got this. It was just
effectively
Aquanauts.
Right. Like there's the sharks, but there's like weird alien sharks because there's some like goofy hammerheads with like weird eyeballs on them and stuff. And you see some of the sea people ships that look like kind of deep ocean dwelling fish. It's a really interesting theme. I really kind of think this would have been a cool one. The story goes this theme was introducing new monorail pieces in new colors, and because the monorail system in previous themes was not performing well, Lego ultimately canceled it. And it was Futron's monorail. And it says, this is according to Brickopedia, many new monorail parts and colors were made for this theme, but when Futron's monorail failed to make money, development of Citron stopped. And this is the one where I feel like Lego, just to see how popular Lego monorail is these days, if Lego
Mm-hmm.
only knew how popular it would become, I feel like they would have, wished they could have continued this. But ultimately, because it just never, things like Futron just kind of put the nail in the coffin almost prematurely, right? So
Yeah.
I think that's kind of an interesting concept where we just, again, like those buildable figures, had Lego known or kind of seen, the what would have been popular, I feel like they really would have continued some of these things. So yeah, I don't know, Grinch, any thoughts on Citron or kind of those canceled themes in general?
I like Citron because, like, Atlantis was during my dark age,
Yeah.
but that was always a really compelling theme for me. I just really like kind of the sea backdrop. I really like um, the story of the underwater world sort of thing. There's a lot of cool stuff that you can do as far as like original creations go. Like it's a really interesting space, like you were saying with some of the ships that were designed to be like the bottom dweller fish. I forget what they're called, the ones with the little globe on the top of
Yeah.
the head. That
Anglerfish.
anglerfish, thank you. But yeah, and then they got like these mutant hammerhead shark bat things. I mean, really kind of just cool, kind of out there, interesting stuff. I was a little disappointed in the Europa as a theme. This one looks like it was probably more 70s, I'd say, than like 90s. But really kind of, I just like kind of more the more historical theme. So this would have been more of a like Russian Dutch sort um, of theme, right? With similar to Pirates and Castles. Um, whereas like Pirates, we had the Imperials. This would have been more of a like formal
Almost like a Prussian.
18th century. Yeah, and I think that would have been kind of cool because I just really like the historical themes a lot. Um, but yeah, no, Cybots. I think we had talked about a little bit when we talked about was it Throwbots and how this sort of thing existed, and they kind of are reintroduced a lot of this stuff in Slicers, but like the original ones looked more like Bionicle. So when we talked there, we kind of talked about how you know some of these themes have kind of were precursors and canceled, and maybe they had to rework a little bit. And I think that the Citron is an example there of where we kind of got that eventually with like the Aquanauts and stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, it's an interesting case of seeing Lego pivot away from something again, right? Where this is I think is that example of sunk cost fallacy a little bit of them kind of taking this theme to as far as they could take it and then feeling like doing anything more with it would really kind of was just sort of outside of their um
Mm-hmm.
they just weren't getting the value for what they were putting into it anymore. I cannot say strongly enough. I really feel like Citron could have been popular. I think this one was different enough and interesting enough. I'm looking at the picture of the monorail, and it's in yellow, and it kind of is giving 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea vibes a little bit. And I think that would have distinguished it enough as a kind of set.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some really interesting recolors. We had those sort of quarter dome pieces. I think we have a blue one and a yellow one. In the United States, it almost looks like the cage that is behind the home plate on a little league ball field. But a lot of the space themes in the 80s and 90s use these in various transparent or translucent colors. So we had like blue and orange and yellow and green, I think, at one point. And these were red ones. I don't think red ones were ever created. So it's interesting to see, some of these transparent pieces, windshield pieces and stuff being, depicted in this colorway that we never saw in Lego afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
So, not that I think that's the only reason to build these, but they are kind of interesting. To your point too about Europa, I think that would have been a really interesting theme. One that we basically in our Ninjas series said, hey, this would be an interesting discussion to go back and revisit kind of these medieval or older sequences all around the world, not just sort of in the Northwestern European quadrant of what Lego is focused on. So, I think both of those themes would have been good. Cybots, I am 1,000% okay that it was canceled. Those were weird looking. And yes, that was a great decision, Lego Group.
I think it's important to remember though, like, yeah, as a builder, there's always a takeaway, Wes. There's always a takeaway. As a builder, it's okay to, like, if you're working something,
Yeah.
sometimes all you need to do is just kind of put it on the bench or put it on the shelf for, like, a year and then come back to it.
Yeah,
And I think
absolutely.
the two of these are examples of where Lego as a large corporation did that with the Cybots. Potentially with Europa. I didn't see a date on when Europa came out. That could have been something that they kind of pivoted into Imperials a little bit, because a lot of the prototype minifigures look very similar to those Imperial minifigures. And maybe they're just like, yeah, there's just not enough here to have like a full-fledged, like, we're getting a little bit too, we know they've tried to avoid like war and stuff, and like pirates can be a little bit whimsical,
Yeah.
right?
And they
There's
always
a
wanted
whole
some sort of
mythos there.
story, right?
Right.
Europa didn't feel
With
like it.
Europa, it's like, are we gonna do like Napoleon Bonaparte or something like that? Like, like,
The story of the
so
sultry French general who ran around Europe rampaging.
yeah, they had the little legs for him too. Burn.
Which he actually wasn't that short in real life. So it's kind of funny.
Ridley Scott told me.
Okay.
I'm just kidding. I still haven't even seen that movie.
Well, Grinch, I did want to single out two specific examples. And for the listeners, they're probably thinking like, well, wait a second.
What would
You guys
those
haven't
be?
talked about the Osprey. We mentioned it, right? But like, let's talk about that one. And let's talk about the most recent one, at least by my understanding, which is the Temple of Doom set from Indiana Jones.
Mm-hmm.
So I kind of pulled out some of the information about both of them. The Osprey one is fascinating because Lego actually, well, both of them are fascinating because Lego actually included a release as to why they ultimately canceled them. And, you can tell that the sets that are kind of reaching full maturity that have been canceled really late, like Lego feels obligated to say something. I think that's, pretty good corporate governance on their part. Being forthright with the consumer, especially in kind of today's expectation where the set name and set number are announced almost a year in advance. We're starting to see information about 2026 already, which is crazy. Right. So
apparently we're getting an Osprey. No, I'm just kidding.
So this was an interesting case because this was announced. It was a Technic set. It was going to be a Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey, designed in the role of a search and rescue aircraft. And as it kind of reached full maturity, an organization based in Germany, the German Peace Society, actually began to protest the creation of this set. And they said, hey, Lego, we hear what you're saying, that this is a search and rescue vehicle, but there are no examples of Ospreys currently in production or plans in production for strictly civilian use. The V-22 Osprey is a exclusively military aircraft. And so while you are making the distinction that it's a search and rescue aircraft, in reality, it is not. It is a machine of war. And so that was kind of their stance. And Lego took
Dude,
that to
this
heart.
M1 Abrams is actually just a transport for
It
civilians.
delivers milk and the newspaper.
It delivers goats.
The cannon actually
farms.
shoots the newspaper into people's yards. So
exactly,
it's a paper delivery tank. No, Grinch, I think that's an interesting line to take because the Osprey is used for search and rescue operations. It's just used for military search and rescue operations. So
right.
I think this was an interesting way where I don't fault the way Lego went with it. I also feel like it was maybe a little obvious of the problem, kind of in hindsight especially, but their official kind of line was that the Lego Technic Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey was designed to highlight the important role that the aircraft plays in search and rescue. While the set clearly depicts how a rescue version of the plane might look, the aircraft is only used by the military. We have a long-standing policy not to create sets which feature real military vehicles, so it's been decided to not proceed with the launch of this product. We appreciate that some fans who were looking forward to the set may be disappointed, but we believe it's important to ensure we uphold our brand values. There are going to be some stores that have already received stock, but Lego stores should never receive stock. Our sales teams have been in touch with their customers as well. I would expect a few mom and pop type shops to receive a shipment, but larger retailers will be less likely. I don't think that was actually the Lego piece. So I think that last piece was that we uphold our brand values. Ultimately, we know that some people did get these sets. They were released into the LAN for review. So it's very easy to go onto YouTube and see people's reviews of these sets. And you can go onto eBay and still find these sets. Interestingly enough, though, if you go onto something like Bricklink, you will find no mention of this set at all, which makes sense because this was after Lego had purchased Bricklink, but it has been scrubbed from the Lego records. Grinch, what do you think? Too harsh? Just right?
Sorry, I'm distracted because I'm looking at eBay and somebody's like trying to resell one of these and they've clearly just like scotch taped it back shut. My God. I was just trying to look at price.
Yeah, I mean,
sure they got it for $900.
They're pretty expensive. So,
there's something I had overlooked until we did this episode, and for a long time I was kind of like, I get it. I see both sides. But I think there's one really important distinction here.
Yeah.
And that is, for example, Indiana Jones, we got the Jeep. Like, that's a military Jeep, right? We've had military, we had the plane from, why do I keep going back to Indiana Jones? We had the plane from Indiana Jones,
of
right?
Nazis
We've had
Indiana Jones.
German soldiers, sir.
Excuse me. I stand corrected.
Exactly. This is named by name as the Bell Boeing V-22 Osprey.
Mm-hmm. We've had examples of tilt rotors in Technic and Lego System before.
Right. But this is specifically saying it is that.
Right.
Right. It is a Bell Boeing
it's a licensed
V-22 Osprey licensed by, and in that case, it'd be like if the Dreamliner was only used for like stealth bombing. It would be like
if they made a Lockheed Martin F-22 racing, jet, and it'd be like, that's great, Lego, but the Lockheed Martin F-22 is not. It's a military airplane,
right?
So
it'd be like if they made a Lego Sopwith Camel. Oh wait, they did.
Well, and
that's where I go. That's where I go back to being like, but I think the key here is that they were calling it the Osprey and trying to represent as something that might not be, in the Sopwith Camel's history. I can't defend the Sopwith Camel. I also can't defend the Red Baron. They did the Sopwith Camel twice as well.
Yeah.
so
but
I think that's a really key point, is that they the set is called the V-22 Osprey.
And the Sopwith Camel, full disclosure, is a set where I am legitimately surprised that they made. And I, based on what they have said their corporate values are, am surprised.
The Red Baron was a ace pilot from World War One.
Yeah, I mean it's just it's interesting that distinction.
We don't make historical vehicles, though. I feel like that'd be a funny like TikTok skit, like Lego, like, nope, we don't make historical vehicles, but you made this. Yeah, exactly. We don't make historical vehicles, but you made this. Nope, we don't make historical vehicles.
Yeah. No, it's an interesting again, an interesting hair to split, and I am not sure the logic stands between both of them. So, but again, and you're right, it's odd too that the Sopwith Camel had a revisit later, which I think is funny.
They made the mistake twice. Yeah. That's not.
Well, 3 times if you count the
doing
Red
doing
Baron.
it once is a mistake.
Yeah.
Doing it twice is a trend.
So I think it's an interesting case of maybe just Lego ultimately reflecting. Nobody says Lego can't make a mistake, right? So I think this is a course correction for Lego where they go, we really meant it when we said we're not trying to make military vehicles. We've allowed it to occur when it's in relation to an IP. Again, to your point, right? Like they're not called Nazis, they're called German soldiers. Like even though in Indiana Jones, they're Nazis, right? So like they're willing to take some, risks there, but at the same time too, like there's a line there that they won't even cross. And so I think that's just kind of an interesting distinction that's being made here. I think
Mm-hmm.
it's unfortunate because I thought that set actually looked really cool with the tilt rotor kind of function and everything else that was going on. But I certainly understand. And at the end of the day, Lego's an independent company who can make their own decisions. But
They can do what they want.
I want to save that discussion for the takeaway Grinch. I want to talk about the last set, and this is the most recent set to be canceled. This is the Temple of Doom set. So,
Mm-hmm.
what's your thoughts here, kind of before we dig into the official Lego response?
I think that this was very clearly an example of where the like Lucasfilm came in and said, "We don't want you to make that."
Yeah,
Um, because they've made this before, and I believe around the same time or shortly before, because this was canceled a few weeks to like month before. I mean, this was pretty close to almost being released to the point where there were some prototypes out there as well. Um, but I remember, it was around the same time. I think Lucasfilm came up with like an updated like bit about Temple of Doom being like, hey, we know that this movie's not like appropriate for today's standards anymore. So I do feel like this was a time where this probably came from Lucasfilms applied a little bit of pressure onto Lego.
yeah.
Like in the last example, the pressure was the German peace people.
It's an
I think
external pressure.
ironic they were okay with the Nazi soldier. No, no, they didn't say anything about the Indiana Jones set. No, but I do think that there was a little bit of external pressure here, like that pressure that was from the German peace people that came from the Osprey. I think this one probably came from Lucasfilms.
The German Peace Society.
Thank you.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Here's Lego's official take. They write that throughout 2022, the Lego Group worked closely with Lucasfilm to optimize our planned product lineup for the upcoming Lego Indiana Jones product launches in April of 2023. The Lego Group shared on their ambassador network as an outcome of this, we consolidated the launch to focus on 3 products that feature some of the most iconic scenes from the Indiana Jones franchise. We hope our fans love the new range and can't wait to get their hands on them. And I think this is an interesting take because they really don't lean into the rationale for why, right? But I think to your point, when it said to optimize our planned product line, the sort of corporate ease of this is, yeah, Lucasfilm asked us to drop this one. Or, to some extent, we made the decision to drop this. As for why, like you mentioned, right, it's, I think, in hindsight, when you rewatch Temple of Doom in a modern lens, the depiction of Indian culture is maybe not as I wouldn't even say appropriate so much as it's like it's highly stereotypical and I'm sure offensive to
Mm-hmm.
people who are not only practice the Hindu faith but also are from the Indian subcontinent and largely associate with that culture and that cultural identity. Not to mention, I do believe there was some brown face in the movie as well, with European actors depicting Indian characters using makeup to appear darker skinned, which is these days something that we try to avoid in motion picture production.
Yeah, I think too. What's really telling is like in that sentence, they were like, we wanted to come up with like 3 um, we wanted to focus on 3 products but they totally did not get this movie, right?
Yeah.
There was 3 movies and they have 2 of them from the Search for the Lost Ark, right? So it does seem like this one was just cut, and my guess is Lucas Arts came in and said nope.
Yeah, so this is literally in the Wikipedia example of brownface, the article. Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom is one of the movie examples of brownface in cinema. So yeah, it's interesting that we got something from Raiders of the Lost Ark. We got 2 sets from Raiders of the Lost Ark, and we got one from The Last Crusade, but we didn't get anything from Temple of Doom at all. And I mean, I don't know about you, Grinch. Of the 3 movies, that's in my opinion, the third best. So like, I'm not super heartbroken over the fact that we didn't get, the scene with his heart getting ripped out. And like, I remember as a kid being freaked out about that and feeling like that was maybe a little more graphic for Indiana Jones than any of the other scenes. I mean, literally in Raiders, the guys PG? Get their faces melted off. They do, but like in this one, somebody's like reaching into like the guy's chest. And
no, dude, the worst part of this movie is when he
brains.
cuts open and that anaconda, and then like all the little baby snakes come out.
Oh
and just,
yeah,
that was gross. I hate snakes. I had a terrible day today. I ran over one in my lawnmower. Unfortunately, it's still alive and in my backyard somewhere, and I am never sleeping again. But that scarred me for life.
It was and I think that was one of the sequences where, like, again, critics of the movie through a modern lens are going to look at that and go, that's highly stereotypical of like what Europeans think of as like Indian cuisine, whereas like, what they could have done is literally just sat down and had, a more authentic dinner, right? I think, again, a case of like over sort of sensationalizing the Indian culture in a way that is not reflective of reality. There was the in that sequence, the dinner sequence in Temple of Doom, remember they do the desserts, and someone, I think it's Short Round, and he's like, what's the dessert? And the guy's like, chilled monkey brains. It just was like, okay, guys, like,
he's like, oh, we're eating eyeball soup, and the eye like looks up.
Yeah.
The bottom of the soup.
It just, there was lots of examples in that movie of, again, where it just didn't do a great job of depicting the Indian culture in a complimentary or good way, I think, and so it doesn't surprise me that
in
one
an
was
accurate way.
Fair enough, right? And it doesn't surprise me ultimately that one was left on the chopping block. Also, I really enjoy the actor for Short Round. I did not like his inclusion in the movie. I'm just gonna throw that out there myself, but that's for our movie podcast.
Amazing. when Willie is just screaming there, and he's like, "Lady, you scream a lot." I love that part.
Yeah, no, I don't mind that so much. I think it's the idea.
He's like, "What's wrong with you, lady?" It's just so good.
I think it's the idea of him like driving the car with like the blocks on his feet that just like, and like, you could have kind of the
like, this is an Indiana Jones movie,
snarky kid without it almost like being overly silly,
sure.
But
without being the magic school bus.
Yeah.
Yeah. God, great show.
Anyways.
Well, West, why don't we save that for our movie podcast? So far, the only listener is
John SC66. Yeah. He's a big fan.
Why don't we? He's our number one fan. It's also our only fan. This is not an OnlyFans though. Wes, why don't we wrap up this conversation?
Yes, Grinch.
On canceled Lego sets before we get canceled ourselves.
There we go. So ultimately, what I wanted to talk about is, we know, again, that there's a significant amount of sets that were canceled kind of late in development. But as we mentioned with like the example of the Lego holiday set, we know that there's sets that were canceled even before that, right? I think that's fair speculation. Ultimately, it's hard to tell. And unless Lego states explicitly why it's canceled, like in the case of the V22, we can only speculate, right? Even with the V22, there was rumors that there was technical issues with the set that caused it to cancel, uh, and that this was their sort of excuse, right? I don't. There's a lot of speculation that kind of revolves around these
I
cancellations.
feel like they would have just come out and been like,
Well, the
"Yeah,
fact that they
sorry
recalled
guys."
sets, right, is a clear
Yeah,
indicator that they're willing to admit, like, hey guys, this isn't, you know, we messed up. Here's the fix, right? So
yeah.
I think had it been that, I think they would have gone back and tried to make good on that. They spend a significant amount of money in research and development and production of these sets. So I don't think if it was a production issue that they wouldn't try to fix that. So what I did want to then talk about is kind of, is this a good thing for the community or bad, right? Knowing that these canceled sets exist. And Grinch, I kind of wanted to hear your take on that first.
Um, Wes put me on the spot. I don't. I think.
I wanted a raw answer.
Oh, it'll be raw. No, I don't think it's. I don't think it has to be a good thing, or it has to be. So often, as a society and as an internet culture, we always go like, "This is either bad or this is either good." This can just be a thing. I think it's a cool story. I think it's one of those fun things where you can, have a conversation at dinner about, oh, the canceled Indiana Jones set, or, you can
Actually,
drop
literally
some.
had that conversation a night at dinner when I was explaining to my wife the premise for our episode tonight.
Yeah,
She
there you
was
go.
mildly interested in what I had to say.
There you go. And normally she doesn't listen to me at all. No, if my sister-in-law is listening, I'm joking. Um, but no, I mean, it doesn't have to be a good or a bad thing. Like, this can just be what it is, and I think Lego has the right to cancel sets as they see fit based off their values, right? Um, I actually think it's fun to know the information. So if I had to pick good or bad, I'd say it's good. I think it creates dialogue in the community, and I think it helps us reaffirm Lego's values, even if not always consistently applied. I'm looking at you, Sop with Camel times two.
Yeah, so I think that was kind of my take too, right? Is like, I think we can see some cases of negative elements of this, right? When a set does get canceled and the Lego, Chad Bro community gets up in arms over that cancellation of like, why is this being canceled? This is dumb. Like, I can't.
Ruining my life.
Right. And it's like, guys, the set wasn't even released. So I think we can, dial it back a little bit in the criticism department here. Right. Because
Mm-hmm.
again, we're forgetting that Lego is a company. They're an independently owned company, right? They're
Also, here's some free inspiration. Go build it yourself.
Yeah. There's no shareholders to answer to, right? So like, they get to do whatever they want. And
Mm-hmm.
if they don't want to release a set, then they don't have to release a set, and it's totally fine. And I think we see too many situations where people will go like, well, they did this, so like, if they did that, then why couldn't they do this one? And it's like, guys, you're picking and choosing, you're cherry picking the logic here. And again, forgetting that Lego has, first off, Lego doesn't need to explain anything. And second
Mm-hmm.
off, like, the fact that they are even giving us an explanation, I think is more, is plenty fine as it is, right? So I think I also enjoy kind of seeing this information. What I would, it's interesting to see from like a historical perspective, just how far the company's come in their history and developed, and then seeing those areas where they've sort of pruned their catalog, in this case, sort of prematurely to kind of keep them on a set desired path. I just think that's fascinating, right? From like, again, like a historical corporate governance perspective of seeing them decide like, no, we're going to pass on this and we're going to press on something else. That doesn't mean Lego's perfect. We've certainly seen things that they've released that have not been as successful as they expected, right? Hidden Side, we talked about that a few episodes ago with the kind of box art debacle, right?
Mm-hmm.
The good example was with Citron mentioning how Futron, kind of with the monorail system, ultimately kind of put an early end to that monorail system. Whereas now it's an extremely coveted piece of the Lego history, right? So I think that's just kind of a fascinating thing to think about. As for takeaways, I say take this with a grain of salt, right? Again, Lego has every right to cancel whatever they want. So if Lego cancels a set you're really excited about, try to understand why. Maybe try to learn about it. Maybe don't try to necessarily add to the discourse in a negative way, right? I think that's kind of a good takeaway for the listener.
And that is today's episode. This will be West's last appearance on this show as he has officially been canceled. No, I'm just kidding. Why don't we go ahead and move over to the brick mail?
Let's do it, Grinch.
Brick mail. All right. So first up, we got John FC66, our latest fan of the AFOLs movie show. Awesome episode. Love Tolkien and have read all his books. All of his books. Like we're talking like the Deep Hits. Did you read the Silmarillion? And watched all the movies. Don't have any of the sets because of price and how big the sets are. Definitely going to be getting the Belrog Book Nook eventually. I would love a set with the Witch King as it's my favorite Lord of the Rings character. That would be awesome. And then he said fair points on The Last of Us and also mentioned he was happy about the Call of Duty talk. And all I'll just say is Call of Duty 4 and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2 are the best CODs out there.
Yes. Interesting. John, you and me both on the price man on those sets. They're pretty expensive. Our next comment comes from Renee Cardwell, who writes, I have Rivendell, but have not built it yet. Not a fan of Barad-dûr or the Shire. Enjoy the podcast. Thanks for another episode. And hey, to each their own. I don't have any of those sets. So Grinch, you have all three of them. I know you have kind of your opinions there, but I think certainly the three of us can agree that Rivendell's a great set. So,
Rivendell, what an awesome set! Mr. Follow says, as a designer by trade, this is in the response to the box art episode, I can appreciate the clean look of the black 18 plus sets and that it forces the quality of the build itself to sell you on buying the set. There's no hiding behind deceptive illustrations or 3D renders when the packaging is just a photo of the set and a subtle colored gradient behind it. Having said that, I can also agree that it's a bit boring in comparison to the box art of old, and today's black boxes are unlikely to trigger the same nostalgia for AFOLs in 30 years as a boxed copy of Fort Legoredo does for us today. God, great example. I can guiltily admit to buying the Ninjago Guardian Dragon almost purely because of its box art, and it may be a rare box that is spared from the recycling bin. Yeah, that's I certainly agree, in the fact that like it definitely is clean. I definitely always had some issues too where it's like when it over suggests stuff on the box, right? Of like, oh, it shows this giant epic battle and stuff in the background. Like it is a very fair point of, it is showing the set for exactly what it is.
Yep. And that's an interesting point too, Grinch, that they, at least unless it's a purposely set up situation where they are trying to kind of do like a combo set, they never show other Lego sets in the background of Lego box art for like the one set, right? They're always very truthful with what you're getting. So I think that's an interesting kind of point there too, right? And I think Mr. Follow kind of highlights an interesting piece, which is just that nostalgia thing, because the people who are young and adolescent AFOLs now, who look back on that 18 plus line as like the line that was out of reach when they were kids, in 10 to 15 years from now, maybe that is going to be their own
I
nostalgia.
feel sorry for your wallets, right?
Yeah,
This is
apologize in
past Grinch
advance.
coming in, just feeling really bad for you.
Yeah. So, but no, I think that's a great point that he brings up, and I do ultimately think it is a cleaner way to display him. But like we've mentioned, the box art still kind of trips a little bit of nostalgia for us too. So clearly, there's something there. But our last comment comes from Jason GN 2045, who writes, I actually really like the simplicity of the mostly black boxes aimed at adults. The older architecture sets are some of my favorites. I grew up in the 80s, and I don't even remember having specific sets. I just remember pieces that were mostly from classic space. So there's no real nostalgia factor for me when it comes to box art. The marketing aimed at adults clearly works on me. And yeah, a good anecdotal, case of to kind of complement Mr. Follows point of, sometimes that really clean box art is all you need to sell what's inside, right? And to again going back to Mr. Follows point, right? You can't really hide behind anything with goofy illustrations. This is just what it is, and you can buy it or you can't, or you don't have to. So
Yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I think the nostalgia, because we've had two people talk about the nostalgia now. I think the nostalgia that really comes from me is just like remembering seeing that, right? And
mm-hmm.
maybe that'll still be there with the black boxes, and we just haven't had them for long enough. And maybe some of it is like, as soon as that's gone, you'll look back, if they ever move on from the black boxes, you might look back and be like, man, remember when they did these black boxes? They were just so clean and crisp and they looked so good on display.
But Grinch, you were a child and buying
I
play
was at one point,
sets.
yes.
And so if you were to go to the Target today, for example, and walk down the Lego aisle, which is now like 3 aisles instead of what was just 1 aisle back in the day, and you were to look at the sets geared towards like 12 and up, for example, there is still a lot of box art in those sets. And those sets still, like, it's not like every Lego set is on a black box. So I would submit to you that you've just grown up and you are
I will
nostalgic
submit to
for the
you,
Lego of yore. But I think they're still
like Britta
there.
from Community, I was nostalgic from a young age.
I think they're still there. I just think you're now looking at the adult sets instead of the 12 plus sets. And so I don't know. That would be my counter, which is I don't know if it's gone. I just think it's gone for us as adult collectors of Lego.
Next time you're in the Lego store, just take a moment to like look and be like, there's the black box wall, and then everything else is over here. It
You're not
really does
wrong.
feel that way. I mean, it
You're not
really
wrong. But
does.
we mentioned this
Yeah.
in the explosion of like sets over $200, right?
Yeah.
Like
Yeah. 100%.
Lego has taken a huge step. When did they announce the adults welcome kind of? I don't think it was adults welcome, but that tagline, or maybe it was adults welcome, but like that
I think it
adult
was
build line that they had, that was like 2022 ish, right? I mean,
2021, I want to say. Yeah.
yeah, I was gonna say. So point is right. That was relatively recent that they made that distinction. And to your point, you go into the Lego store, and almost at every single Lego store, you turn right, and that's the adult section.
Mm-hmm.
Through Star Wars is basically what's on the right wall, and everything else is on the left side, and that's Duplo, which is on the front left corner, all the way to usually like Speed Champions or Marvel, which is on the back left corner. And the adult section, like you said, is taking up an entire half of the store now, whereas
Yeah.
before it did not. And we've seen that explosion in sets that have just been tailored towards adults. So again, I don't know if what you're reacting to is just the fact that the catalog is now more adult centric than before, or the fact that box art has ultimately changed. But it certainly has changed the way I think you and I approach the theme, for sure. or how we feel about it.
Sure. Well, thank you, Jason, for writing in. Appreciate all the comments from everybody this week. And that is a wrap of another episode of AFOLs Welcome. If you've enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe and leave us a review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you are listening to this show. If you would like to write the podcast, please email us at afolswelcome@gmail.com or follow us on Instagram at AFOLs Welcome. Thank you for listening, and we will catch you on the next one. Bye.